Hi, Terry here, and welcome to Times Gone Tech. I have had this feeling all morning that something looks different. There's just something different out here today, and I can't quite put my finger on what it could be. What could be different? Anyway, oh yeah, this thing right here. What this video is about is this. This is the 1773 British Eliott Dragoon carbine. And yes, this is actually how it was carried on a sling like this. Now, yeah, you might think this is really kind of uncomfortable to be carrying a big ass carbine like this around. And you're right if I was on foot, but this was not designed for the infantry. Let me explain. Well, first, just to answer a question about this rig, is it hard to use? No, not at all. Not hard at all, especially on the back of a galloping horse. It's actually quite easy to bring up to bear. And that's because of this unique side mount, sling mount here, which I'll talk a little bit about later. So first, let me take this off because I'm not on the back of a horse. And I do find it just a little uncomfortable. That's better. Okay. First of all, one thing you might notice is how short this thing is. I mean, this is like a modern combat rigged shotgun. You would think, being smoothbore 65 caliber, that this thing would have absolutely no range and no accuracy at all. But actually, it's surprisingly accurate for the use that it was intended. You see, the mainstay of the British front line out on the battlefield, the heavy infantry, was the musket that today we call the Brown Bess. Big, heavy assault weapons. They were 75 to 80 caliber. They'd measure in at about 60 to 66 inches long. This one, if you can't tell, is a little shorter than that. I'll get into the dimensions here in a little bit. And while they were incredibly effective, deadly, and accurate out at the range on the battlefield at that time that they were intended, a lot of soldiers actually didn't like them. They were too big, too heavy, too front heavy. It actually took a lot of practice to get used to using one, to being good at it. And the British were renowned throughout the world as being outstanding marksmen, but it's only because they practiced pretty much every day. I mean, there was no spare time among the soldiers during daylight hours. They were out in the field practicing, and they got very good at it. But again, it was big, it was heavy, it was front heavy. When they were carrying it on a sling on their shoulder, it had a tendency to want to slide off. It wasn't maneuverable in tight places, and they'd experimented with different models of Brown Bess, carrying them on the pommel of the horse in different configurations, and it just didn't work out. Just absolutely terrible. Same thing with the artillery. They had to carry their muskets slung crossways over their shoulder to keep it from sliding off. The thing was heavy. It was hard to get off, difficult to bring up to bear to shoot if they needed to. They didn't like it. Cavalry didn't like it. It was completely useless on the back of a horse, for one. And especially among the mobile infantry, which they had mobile infantry then. They were mounted infantry. But what they would do is they would use their horses to very quickly maneuver themselves into a tactical position on the battlefield. Then they would dismount and fight as infantry. So they needed a musket. You can't do that with just a couple of pistols and a saber. So in the early 1700s, somebody got the genius idea of taking a Brown Bess and cutting about 6 inches off the front of the barrel. Now that was what started it. And it really worked out so well, became so popular among the artillery, that in 1748, the British formally issued an artillery carbine that was about 6 to 8 inches shorter than a Brown Bess. The front of the stock was recessed to allow for the attachment of a bayonet. caliber had been reduced a little bit. I've got one, it's 75 caliber instead of 80, 75 to 80 for the Brown Bess. And long story short is it was just an instant hit. So other units like cavalry and mobile infantry, who are also called dragoons, by the way, they got to looking at designing their own short carbines for mounted use. One of these was a Colonel George Augustus Eliott. In 1760, he either designed or had designed a carbine specifically for mounted and infantry use, because that's how the dragoons typically served. And he was commander of the 15th Light Dragoons. So he either supervised or he designed a carbine. And it was the forerunner of this carbine. That was 1760. By 1773, a few changes had been made, most notably this unique side-mounted sling bracket. And the front part of the barrel was cut back to allow for the attachment of a bayonet. And the attachment of the ram was a little different because, you know, you got this thing upside down on the horse, right? And you're bouncing along. You don't want the ram to fall out. Duh. So it actually attaches a little tighter than a typical firearm would. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to talk your ear off, but I've got this thing loaded, and guns were made to shoot, not to look at or talk about. So I just got this in. I don't know if it's even going to shoot or not, but I do have it loaded. So oh crap. I was going to say, let's see what we can do, but I forgot to bring the target out. So let's cut and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Got my target set up. Now that's about 30 yards down range. And I know with this camera, it's in the angle, you can't tell, but I paced it out some pretty good steps. This is 30 steps out. So let's see if it'll even shoot, for one, and if I can hit anything with it. Yeah, I see it high. Not too bad though. It has got some kick to it. This might look like a toy gun for a child, but it's not. So let me get my makeshift paper clip vent pick out here, clean that out. And let me load it back up again, and while I'm telling you a little more about it. The Eliott Dragoon, of course, was initially issued in 1760. And it was redesigned several times until 1773 when this version came out. And just want to let everybody know that this is not an idea that was tried, didn't work, and then was thrown away, or that had only limited use. This musket actually saw service in the War of 1812. Now, it saw service in the American Revolution too, a little more limited basis. Being issued in 1760, though, it missed out on the French and Indian War. But even so, George Washington was familiar with it and liked it. And along with I can't believe it. I'm losing my patches. There they are. And I'm not using a paper cartridge, as you might have noticed. I'm using pre-waxed, store-made cloth patches. I've got to try different loads out and see just how they work. But it saw service, like I said, in the American Revolution, where George Washington actually advised his mounted units to trade their muskets in for, dropped it, either a blunderbuss or a carbine whenever possible, because he saw how effective they were on horseback. They saw service in the War of 1812, and it was also used against Napoleon until Napoleon's defeat, of course, in 1815. After that, the British decommissioned it and sold a bunch of them off. And interestingly enough, they did not sell them to the civilian market. And I'm not entirely sure why that is, because this actually is about the same size as an English trade gun. The Indians liked these short barrel guns. In fact, this may be what actually inspired the Dragoon, was the English trade gun. The fusil de chasse was a bit longer, but the English trade guns came in different sizes. Depends on the contract, who made it. And then they could be had for about this size, that's which the Indians really liked. This also made a good civilian Fowler, being large caliber, 65 caliber, and smooth bore. So why didn't they make their way out onto the civilian market? I think it's because of the front part of this stock where it was cut down for bayonet. That made it a military gun, and the British, in my opinion, just did not like the idea of selling a military gun to civilians. So they sold it off to foreign armies, most notably Mexico, who bought a lot of them in 1815.